All right, guys. It's day 310 of the Gaza war, and we've got our normal therapy session. I've got Sina, Mikey, Alex, Nora. So, chronologically, since our last session, we had I don't know that we talked since the Israelis assassinated Haniyeh, and no, we haven't. Yeah, they assassinated Haniyeh in Iran. They assassinated Fawad Shoker in Beirut. Then Nasrallah made a couple of speeches, and then we had the rape, all of the rape. I don't think we've talked about all of the rape, torture debate going on in Israeli society, which has been a head spinning exercise in itself, trying to follow that and make sense of how the society that generated this fake rape propaganda that was shoved down our throats for all these months to justify what they're doing is now openly admitting and debating and discussing at all levels on the streets, in the government, in the media, how it's cool to rape, um, and how it's just part of we're just going to have to all accept it. And while they were doing the rape debate, we had this massacre that seems to have been beyond what we've seen before at a school. They didn't have water, so they cut the water, so they sent people into this safe zone. They bombed them while they're praying in the morning, and then they can't put out the fire because there's no water. So, all the while, the resistance axis has promised a response, and it hasn't come, and it's been unbalancing for the Israelis clearly, but it's also been and the way that the US has put in its dispositions of all of its naval assets and building this new multi-layered air defense and militarizing Cyprus to an extent they haven't done before, and trying to put this alliance together with Jordan and Saudi and other countries to defend Israel so that Israel can I've had this image in my mind since this is a therapy session of like some kind of anime figure with this gigantic shield, just like holding the shield up while the torture, like so that this torture and murder can take place under this shield. And that's like, it's just the weirdest thing for me because like it just analyzing militarily, it's like I thought that Israel was getting ready to attack Lebanon, and I thought, well, if they attack Lebanon, it's gonna really accelerate their military collapse. And I gather somewhere that they decided not to do that, at least for the time being, and they tried these provocations. But I think there was some wisdom that they gathered all of their material resources and all their military resources of the whole that the US was able to put together, and they're using it just to shield themselves while they torture Palestinians in Gaza and to a large extent the West Bank too. So it's just like the irrationality of that and the the absence. I kind of wrote this on Twitter. I wrote, every day I wake up and I'm amazed by how naive I am that like a new line is crossed, and I'm like, I didn't think that you could get away with that. Like I don't know how I thought that, or what mechanism I believed would have stopped it, but I had some sense that like counterproductive actions, like wouldn't be taken. So this is where I'm at. Like it's some kind of suspended animation. It's like Israel is looking for, and I don't know, I think it's a time limited thing. I think it's a resource limited thing. I don't think you can stay on red alert. I don't think you can have this shield up here in this position. I think your shoulders get tired. I think, maintaining that position is costly and can't be maintained forever. But like while they're doing that, it's like the helpless feeling that I've had all this time feels even more amplified right now. Like they're intensifying the massacres on Gaza. They've like they've got this incredible shield that like has never been assembled before. And I don't know anything, but I imagine this is part of what's caused the delay, where like Iran must just be like, holy, you know, holy shit, like this is a missile shield like we've never seen. So I don't know. That's kind of like where I'm feeling. It's like I didn't know I could feel more helpless than before. I didn't know I could feel more impotent than I did before. Uh, but uh, but that's where I kind of am right now. Um, how about you guys?
Yeah, that resonates a lot. Yeah, this last massacre, I mean, the last 2 weeks um have been just grueling, and some of the most like gruesome, horrific images and testimonies. Yeah, the massacre yesterday, Saturday morning, Friday night in the West. Yeah, I don't you know it I mean I was um surprised even this far in, this is the 11th month. I was surprised that they could still, kind of like what you said, that they could still get away with this. Um, and yeah, that like feeling of disbelief, and the feeling of like, and we talked about this months and months and months ago too, of like, as a kid, you're like, you're looking to people in authority. You're looking to, your teachers and your parents and your grandparents and the people in your community to like provide you like a sense of safety and protection. And um it's going to be okay. Like we're you're going to be fine, you're going to be safe. And there's nothing like that for Palestinians. There's no and there's no For us, like, there's no political body, right now, of any authority in the so-called West that is like, we're going to stop this. In fact, it's the opposite. We have these fucking scum of the earth Democrats, um, like handing over more of our money to shred these children. And just the stories that have been coming out, like, you know, I mean, this happened, as you said, Justin, at dawn prayer, when the Israelis knew that there would be like a high concentration of people getting up to stand in line and prepare for the dawn prayer. Um, and and the blast, I mean, this GBU, whatever it's called, like, it's a bunker buster bomb, right? It's like this small diameter, um, high impact, whatever, like, it's some of the most like just sadistic, sick kind of weaponry that's been used against people in that region for decades by the West. But the bunker buster bomb on a civilian population, um, they know what it does, and it shredded people into so many pieces that for family members who came to try and just retrieve their loved ones' bodies, there was not, I read a report this morning, there was not one body in that massacre that was left whole. And so rescuers had to weigh like plastic bags full of human meat to give to family members, like, oh, you lost 3 people, here's 3 bags of 70 kilograms each, because that's how much um just parts there. I can't even describe how what that says about us, what that says about how the West has identified Palestinians, what that says about how sick and disgusting Israel is to its core, that they would knowingly shred men, women, and children into pieces that have to be collected by weight, um, after they've been uh, protesting around their sick settler colony, demanding the right to brutally rape Palestinians. Like the level of like you can, like it sounds absurd. It sounds absurd that this state is still allowed to exist, um, and is being protected, right? Like that shield analogy is perfect, Justin. That they're being shielded and given all the tools they need to rape and to shred and to gaslight us. And I just, yeah, I don't know, like the past week, but especially the past like 48 hours has completely just kind of shaken me into a new level. uh I mean, I was talking about this with my spouse. We were talking about how like what like all of this like seething rage and grief and like uh disbelief that we're feeling like 24 hours a day for the last 10 months and decades before that, as we've been activists and journalists and scholars, working on Palestine and seeing the day-to-day grind of this ethnic cleansing project and the settler colony nightmare, right? Like, um when there's how do we hold that? Like what physically happens, like physiologically in our bodies? um we're the ones who that turns into like cancer and heart disease and strokes and aneurysms, right? Like that's, we know that there's like a physiological response to terror and and anger and grief. We know that. And meanwhile, like the most evil fucking monsters who are doing this and perpetrating this, they're sleeping fine every night. They sleep just fine. And that's and Marx talked about that, right? Like this is not a new concept, that the ruling class um sleeps just fine. They live long lives. Dick fucking Cheney is still alive. Like these people, these Kissinger lived so long, like I don't know. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot just about like yeah, just about that, just like how like utterly unjust um this this time period is right now. And like I want revenge. I want it to stop. I want the Israelis to feel a modicum of what Palestinians have been feeling for the last 100 years, in the last 10 months specifically, a modicum. And I and like I just yeah, I don't know, I don't know if that will ever happen. And that also like enrages me. Like, do they, if their like disgusting state finally falls apart, which we know it will, we know it will, they're just gonna like, go to Santa Monica or like Jersey City or, back to Berlin or back to Warsaw or like wherever they're from originally. And they're gonna live their lives and they're gonna raise their kids and grandkids and they're gonna talk about the time when they're pathetic little like disgusting settler state fell apart because of, they're going to make up some reason like it was just the world hates Jews and all, this like disgust. They're not going to feel anything. and it's not going to be a reflection of the reality. And that is one of the most enraging things to me right now. And that just like, I don't know, it just like I can feel this rage like coursing through me, and it hurts. And I don't know what to do with that. So that's, I don't know, that's where I am. I'm like kind of like in this bottomless pit of
Yeah. Well, I mean,
everything.
partly I think we've watched Israelis refashion human nature, like refashion themselves into the image of whatever they hate. And like
Yeah.
the way the rape debate went down, from making up rape to justifying rape and celebrating rape, it's interesting to see like how they take something and then make themselves into it.
Yeah.
And like the same, I actually think that part of the raping of prisoners is also an adaptation, like the way Hannibal Doctrine's an adaptation to, they capture us so we can't capture to trade prisoners. And so in order to keep our prisoners, we're going to kill our own people. And the way that, just the destruction is the way they're this particularly destructive form of warfare is because they Palestinians have adapted to a form of warfare where they win any interaction with an actual Israeli soldier. So they just target civilians and try to fight from far away. And then this rape, it's like they try to break Palestinians in prison, and Palestinians are not broken in prison. And so they've fashioned themselves into torturers and celebrators of torture and rape so that they can, like, oh, yeah, we'll show you that we can break you in prison. And it's like every time they do this, they break something in their own society. They don't have a society like if you get captured now, they'll kill you. If you like your society is known as torturers and rapists and a haven for pedophiles and everything else. So it is certainly a weird thing to watch. And justice, like we've said before, it's hard to imagine how you can do justice after millions of people participated in this. Like you can potentially imagine punishing leaders and influencers, but like this is a mass this is a mass participation in genocide. So it's a very strange situation to try to see into the future. Alex.
No, I'm at a similar place as you guys, and let me just start by um, talking about two things that I read connected to this latest school massacre, which is like everything that Nora described. I mean, I know we've witnessed some pretty awful shit since October 7th, but like this is yeah. The first is to see a video of a little girl who was saying, we are fed up. And at the end, she says, I will not forgive you in this life or the next. And I will ask my God to never forgive you as well. And I think that's being generous to the West. And she was specifically addressing also Arab nations. She called them Arab nations who weren't doing anything, but were just sitting there and witnessing what's happening to Palestinians in Gaza. And then I came across a testimony of a doctor who treated um, some of the injured from this bombing. And I'm just going to read his tweet. He wrote, one of the most difficult and horrific bloody scenes we witnessed today at the Baptist Hospital in Gaza after the Israeli massacre at the Tabin school was of a young boy, 16 years old, who arrived with us with his lower body shattered and crushed, his left hand amputated, and deep wounds and burns all over his body. During the emergency surgery, I was shocked when I found another person's head crushed between the bones of his shattered legs. I could only recognize him by his mouth and chin. It was a scene beyond the capacity of the heart and the mind to bear. That is like, so reading this kind of stuff, and then, here in the US, being subjected to these coconut pilled motherfuckers who then are telling us to ignore this kind of thing and to, on blind faith, root for someone electorally who somehow is going to change the type of violence and carnage that I just read. And not just like like people who describe themselves as being a part of some part of left that I never want to be a part of. Like the like that Arash Azizi guy who like did this whole thread about why we should be voting for Kamala Harris. And it's just, bro, shut the fuck up. Like, stop doing these tweets. Because when you do these tweets, all I can think about are some of the videos and the descriptions and the images that are coming out of just one horrific school massacre, which is one in a long, long chain. And after October 7th, and obviously before October 7th, that we've been subjected to every single day. So to have someone then come in and say, like, yeah, ignore all that, you know, let's vote for Kamala Harris, who had an awful moment this last week too, where she, man, I don't even know, but the way she talked down to protesters, which is so indicative of this thoroughly rotten political party that is called the Democratic Party, which in the end is not different from the Republican Party. And you know, thanks to Mikey, I follow Mikey on Twitter, and he kind of keeps me like a little balanced with his sharp and biting critique of U.S. electoral politics. Um, because it is just easy to say, you know, all this shit is bipartisan, you know, right? But like, it still matters that we need to analyze it, right? Um, and then that leads me to a question that you guys, that Justin and Nora, you've brought up, and I'm sure we can, Mikey and Sina will bring up, is, you know, what's going to change the situation in the end? What's going to change the situation? Like, and I always, you know, I wake up every day like Justin, I think of, and I like berate myself for being so naive, right? Because I think what we've been witnessing since October 7th is like 500 years plus of Western imperialism and colonialism, just like in condensed form, and it's being transmitted to us via new technology. Like, this is, you know, Justin, you wrote that piece a while back, talking about the difference between counterinsurgency and just colonial exterminate, like exterminate the brutes type. And this is obviously at this point, it's not a debate anymore. Like what happened at the Alta Bean school, like shows that this is an exterminate the brutes. They're trying to kill them all. You have prison guards at that horrific rape prison who have said as much. We are gonna kill you all. That's what the situation is. Um, so what's going to change this? And I try to situate myself historically, and I think about, look, this is not the first time the U.S. government has supported a genocide, right? In 1980, three American nuns and an American laywoman were raped and killed by Salvadorian death squads that were trained and financed by the U.S. And then the U.S. government came out and said, well, they were more than just nuns; they were pistol packing nuns. So like, I know this shit. Like intellectually, I know that the US government has full on sponsored genocide in Guatemala and El Salvador, all these countries in Central America, especially in the 80s. And yet I'm still shocked to see what's going on today. And I that's when I like berate myself for being so naive. And in the end, it's like, so what's going to change this dynamic? And obviously what we've seen is that it's nothing from within the US is going, or the West is going to change this dynamic. And again, we know this historically. We know this from all the national liberation movements. We know this from indigenous resistance movement. We know this from the Haitian Revolution. Like in the end, that's type of resistance and violence from the people suffering this imperialist violence are the ones who are going to change and alter this dynamic. And for us, those of us who live in the belly of the beast, it brings up the question in terms of like, what are we supposed to do then? Like, what is our role within all this? Because I'm going to break my cell phone for I don't know how many times if I see another tweet thread about how if we vote for Kamala Harris, that's going to somehow change the situation. I don't like, I can't deal with that anymore. It's going to be a lot of broken technology in my house up until now, until post November, right? And you know, watching her berate these protesters, her national security advisor justifying the bombing because there were supposedly Hamas people at the school, which is so bullshit at this point, but that's still the same script. Um, it's just, yeah. And then the way you know, for me personally, watching her build the wall commercials, it's just, you know, they're going to build the wall, but smartly and more humanely. I mean, it's the same shit as Trump. So again, I go back to that question: what's going to fundamentally alter this situation? What's going to put an end, whether momentarily or permanently, the exterminate the brutes operation that the Israelis are waging in Gaza? And it's something that's going to come, you know, not from the West. And I think for people to still believe that somehow that's a possibility. Like we're gonna be what, a year into this, 2 years into this, and people are still gonna vote blue. They're going to be the ones who somehow change this dynamic. It just the lack of not just like historical knowledge, but the lack of like morality and ethics and political commitment is something that is, in addition to everything that Nora described, which I feel 100%. Like on top of that, I feel having to deal with these people who are going to somehow berate me because I'm like, I'm never voting for these people. And you can call me a quote unquote single issue voter if you want, but you guys are just sponsoring genocide and you're cool with that somehow. Like you're somehow able to compartmentalize that. You're able to compartmentalize the fact that you don't think the colonial boomerang is going to come home, or it already has come home. I mean, essentially what we're living through in the US is a product of like 9/11 and the war on terror. And yet we're still somehow, there's still somehow a disconnect between that fundamental point. Um, so yeah, it's just, that's where I'm at. I mean, it's rage upon level of rage. But I'm still thinking a lot about this question, like what's going to change this dynamic, and finally like bring justice and liberation for the people of Palestine.
The naivety too, Alex, for me is like it's not just the naivety of like why can't the UN or China or Russia or someone, some Deus ex machina come and save the situation. It's also the naivety of like how hard the Americans are willing to fight to shield Israel, how many resources they're willing to do, how many, as we've said before, like how many institutions they're willing to discredit and how much credit they're willing to squander.
Look at the
That's
script that
what I'm
they
naive about. That's what
this
surprises me.
script this totally the script that like all the official their government officials put out after that school massacre was exactly the same. It was exactly like, you just the a horrific massacre. We hear you, we see you, we feel you, Palestinians, but there were Hamas people inside the school. This was a Hamas terrorist base, and it's the Palestinians' fault. It's that old like Golda Meir thing, right? Like you made us do this type of thing. But it was so scripted, from Samantha Power to Kamala Harris's main national security advisor. It's the same shit. So I'm right. Like that will never not be shocking to me, Justin. I think that's exactly right. Like that's part of me getting mad at myself for being so naive, that like I still feel unable to fully accept 100% that they're willing to go to these lengths to support something that is obviously, it's genocidal. But they still next week we're going to see all their little spokespeople come out and say the same shit, which they've been doing. I don't know why. It's really bad for me to watch these videos, but I still do it once in a while. um but we're going to see the same thing. Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with here is quote unquote single issue voter, right? I think the problem is that we have like a single issue empire, and we're seeing that the United States like doesn't have a red line when it comes to Israel and protecting its most important, strategically vital vassal state in this resource rich, geostrategically important region. That there is nothing that they aren't willing to do, nothing that they're even willing to sacrifice in terms of its public image and even its own domestic interests, uh, to protect Israel. There's nothing they're not willing to do, and I think Israel is pushing the U.S. right to that brink, right into oblivion. It's carrying it down with it, and I think, as someone who's always looking for silver linings to this, is like, despite all of the awful things that Israel has done, they're all signs of pure desperation. It's this colony that is flailing because nothing is working. Their military hasn't been able to change any of the facts on the ground, where even Western, imperialist outlets like CNN are finally having to admit that there have been no facts on the ground that have changed, even despite the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh, right? Where they, it's like uh Che's famous last words, right? Shoot, coward, you're only killing a man. They can only kill Haniyeh once, but Ismail Haniyeh's name is going to ring out over thousands of more IOF, red triangles, and and uh and it's quite clear that even their stated goals of like returning the hostages and even any prospect of a ceasefire goes completely out the door when you kill the other side's chief negotiator. and and they got to be kicking themselves at this point to have Hania's replacement be Yahya Sinwar of all people, right? And yeah, and further just reveals that they had no interest in returning the hostage, that the hostages are actually a liability to them. And I think one of the biggest developments that I think is truly revealing, or should be more revealing, I think, to people who are at all on the fence about the question of the occupation, is, yeah, just how on a dime, after 10 months of genocide, where the case was made based on essentially a blood libel of Palestinian resistance, right? That they were raping women, beheading children, and raping and beheading women, uh, all of which was proven to be lies, thanks to great journalists like in Electronic Intifada, and also just citizen journalists like looking through various contradictory testimonies and a complete dearth of actual evidence. And what we've seen across those past 10 months are more beheaded babies than I ever thought I would see in my lifetime. Um, Documented evidence of it, knowing seeing the actual shards of US manufactured weaponry, proving who was doing it, but also that there were no military strategic assets in the area, but also seeing that like turning on a dime, like the same people who propagated these these lies in order to commit war crimes are the same people who have just completely flipped to explicitly stating that they are a right to rape state. And it's mind-boggling, but it's also, I think quite, like, I out of all the countless mask off moments that we've seen, I think it's one of the greatest. And 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 who could possibly defend Israel at this point, right? Because you can't be an objector to that position while continuing to live in that colony. I just don't think that, like, without burning your passport, and all of your citizenship documents, I don't think there's any way that you can condemn that and still call yourself an Israeli. Like, it's and or a feminist in the West, uh, writ large. And I think that kind of shit should be thrown in people like Kamala's face and anyone who defends her, and that candidacy and that party. And going back to just how, like, some of the silver linings of things just, like, not being fundamentally changed, as Biden would say. um like, left liberals are gonna behave like left liberals. Like, this is something we probably should have expected from the get, that people would go all watermelon emoji and take up the banner of a free Palestine. And the moment that they were given a slightly better option than someone who's literally at death's door, like, just kind of like turning into a raisin, on a beach in Delaware, uh, they completely turn and reinvoke lesser evilism, and compliment Kamala on calling for a ceasefire that we know she doesn't support, and that we know, like, the only thing that will actually produce a ceasefire is something resembling an arms embargo, which she will never ever ever concede to. And to answer Alex's question, I think we all know the answer to, is that, what will stop this, what will change this, is is the resistance, the axis of resistance. And I think yeah, it's been 2 weeks since Hania was assassinated, right? And that is, I think, it feels like a long time because we're unfortunately having to live in this linear time. But I mean, Trump was shot like a month ago. Like an entire universe of possibility is open and closed since then, right? So it's like I think though there are, like Justin, like you were mentioning, the just the pure logistical aspects of the U.S. military bringing everything to bear to create some kind of missile defense shield to defend against what's coming. But I think it's only a matter of time before those logistical problems are solved. And I think in the meantime, Israel is being materially and psychically attrited. And we see all of the really uh visual, visceral aspects of that, including the protests against, prison rapists, prison guard rapists. What one who literally did a mask off moment on social media, right? Like we're literally seeing the mask coming off now. Like that's how much all of this is screwing with Israeli minds. So yeah, that's a bit of how I'm feeling.
Yeah. We should talk a tiny bit about Kamala's moment because it was very specific. I like historically, like I don't know if you guys are old enough. Well, yeah, you're all old enough. There was a thing Clinton did, Bill Clinton, where he went after this rapper Sister Soldier to kind of prove that he wasn't down with black people. Like they thought he was too down with black people, so he just like contrived this conflict with this rapper. And that's how I felt about Kamala's little scold. It was like she was kissing the ring in a way by like showing that she would bully protesters. And like I saw someone tweet like you will never see her talk to a Israeli that way. You will never see her talk to a pro-Israel person that way or a lobbyist. So it's like it's a really it's a really specific demonstration of the kind of bullying she's willing to do of um Arabs,
And it's
anti-genocide
perfect
people.
for white liberals too,
Yeah.
because I was also seeing a lot of tweets like of these like white, sometimes watermelon emoji liberals
Mhm.
saying like, how dare these protesters, try to talk over a black
Mhm.
woman. This is just more like,
Mi-
basically like scolding protesters,
yeah, it's
and
a
using the,
microaggression.
yeah,
It's a
right, a
microaggression.
microaggression, like using identity politics as a cudgel to try and
Yeah.
silence, like, and so it was perfect because it's like, oh yeah, yeah, poor little Kamala Harris like needs to be protected against like this
Yeah.
scary protesters. She's just a woman. She's just a woman of color. Like
Yeah.
not the represent like the liter like the head of the most like powerful empire of slaughter that the world has ever seen, right? Like she needs to be protected. Like it's so perfect. It's so perfect. And that people's red lines aren't literally a Holocaust, that their red lines are like microaggression, like
Yeah.
perceived microaggressions against like this poor little woman. Anyway, it's
She's
so
just the
disgusting.
vice president of the United States. She's
Yeah,
just a
she's just a
small
small
bean
Auditioning.
bean. She's just a
genocidaire.
small bean.
Auditioning to be the commander in chief of the
Yeah.
greatest agglomeration
I
of
hate it.
firepower in
I
human
hate
history.
it so
Yeah.
much.
Well,
She's
and I
never
think that's
won an
another great.
election in her life. She
I
And she
know.
failed her
probably,
way off.
yeah.
She was like less than 2%. She was behind whatever Yang, right?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
California for the primaries in 2020.
I
In
I
California, where
live
she
with
was a
a
sitting senator. Like nobody
yeah.
likes her.
She makes
Yeah,
absolutely
I
no
live with
sense
a
when
guy
she
who
talks.
volunteered for her, and
Oh
I
my God.
bullied him so mercilessly about it. Like every day, I was like, "How's your cop boss, buddy? You're gonna go have fun for your..." Like every day, it was the best. He laughed. He pretended to think it was funny, but I knew in his heart that it grated on him. And she lost. I was like, "Oh
She
man,
lost
you
like
lost!"
miserably.
Yeah,
Can't you
and
pick a
part of the
winner?
reason is that she's constantly hemorrhaging staff because like beyond her actual politics and beyond actually, you know, from being an imperialist cop, she's just like a bad person. Like people don't like her because she's a bully, you know? And there are multiple op-eds and tell-alls about this from former staff who are like there were people who were working on her presidential campaign who were talking amongst themselves and they say I think it's a Washington Post article. Like, yeah, this person can't be president. Like, so, but yeah, going back to what you were pointing out, Nora. Like, I think that's another huge mask off moment, right? Like, it was already starting to wear during kind of like you know, movement for Black lives, you know, struggles for Black liberation, where this nuclear weaponization of identity politics for people in literal fucking power, right, was being deployed and just looking so on its face fucking stupid, right, and just colossally absurd. And I think we see that I think we saw it definitely at the beginning of the genocide too, right? Where Israel was doing its kind of like, you know, intersectional Holocaust type of invocations of identity politics. Like look at our Somali genocidaires and look at our LGBTQ genocidaires, right? And look at all of our women who are committing genocide. All of our Nazi women, they matter? And I think we see that being used now a lot more in the US because that's what you go to in presidential politics when you don't have any actual policy proposals. And I think I think there's only so much mileage on that. Even from like the center left of the Democratic Party, it's gonna start to wear pretty thin. I mean, she's probably, barring any kind of like major October surprises, probably going to win the election because you know, Trump's clearly got no juice left, which is kind of like comedically sad. Um like it's, you know, he really lost
Wait, you're
like
the second
his
person
best
to say
enemy.
this to me today. When did Trump
Yeah.
start being? When did Trump stop being the presumed winner?
He just sounds so diminished. Like he
But
doesn't
that's
have.
but
Yeah,
they all said he was going to lose in 2016 too. But he does it.
but he
His
lost in.
his peeps
But he
like
did.
him
But he
more.
lost in 2020,
Yeah, that's
and
Yeah.
true.
Biden was
Yeah,
barely there.
yeah.
True.
And you
Well,
know,
not
like
according
it's
to
kind of
Trump, he
like
lost.
Well, yeah. I mean
yeah, yeah.
that's a destabilizing thing that they can't
Blind
have an
voters.
election anymore too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
just think,
Yeah.
you know, it's like he's one of those like cartoon supervillains who like loses their
Yeah.
hero, you know? Like he had a perfect enemy in Biden and he doesn't
Yeah.
really know what to do with this new person.
Yeah. Well, he had a perfect enemy in Hillary Clinton,
That's true.
but I mean Kamala is turning herself into Hillary Clinton, so it could be a window for him. I don't know. Sina, you're up.
So I know my job was never to be like the summary guy because I've never done that in any of these episodes. I just feel that like there's an impossible task of like in these like episodes we try to do because we're trying to like sum up our feelings that I honestly don't think that human beings have ever confronted like the scale of violence, like political historical violence that like in any kind of like at the kind of distance that we have. So like, which is to say that like we're in uncharted like territory, it feels that like there's never been this coincidence of, you know, I've talked about this before of like the ability to like reproduce reality and also to like transmit it and publish it and whatever, right? And so like we're the end users of all of this historic change in how we consume the news. So like, yeah, guess what? We're fucked in the head beyond all measure because like we're having like a media revolution experimented into our eyes, beamed into our like whatever frontal cortex, I don't know, warped layer, whatever it's called in your brain. Like it's no, we were never designed this, we were never designed for this. You know, like people the and so like the strange the strange position I find myself in, we're all in this too, is that at the one hand, it's very intimate, this violence to us, because we see like in the sense that like it's close, right? Like we're literally holding our phones like close to our faces. Like I'm in bed, like it's like this intimate, clutching it like a loved one. But like it's also and these are horrible images too that you don't want in your head, but because of like the importance of this and like the actual task of this is to like see it and bear witness. God, it's storming. So like this is pathetic fallacy. John Ruskin, I hate you, but you were right about this one. But like I feel ultimately like there is that weird closeness to it, but then there's this strange distance that at the societal level and where we all reside, there is this mass denial. Right? It's like that meme of all the media people saying, like, what genocide? And there's this intensive act of psychic and basic, like, like obvious, like, perception that, like, oh, this bad thing happening in the world, this thing that we're supposed to be against in our mature, like post World War II era, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, like, this is a strange, like, place to be in, right? Where the evidence of this horrible thing is so in your face. You could consult it anytime you want. But then there are this class of people numbering in probably the tens of thousands who are tasked with not only like diverting your attention, but also just making sure that any stray detail that you catch, you'll remember that you'll question it or whatever, right? And so like I don't know, guys, like the violence of this project is it's so historic in terms of not just like the actual killing capacity of the diaper forces and like their American like suppliers, right? Like we know this, that like Israel is like its huge chunk of its economy is because of it's using its indigenous population to basically test weapons, right? And use and manufacture those weapons and then sell them around the world for vast amounts of money, right? Like we know that's one actual major pillar of the very existence of Israel is to like fulfill that need. And so like I don't know, I'm in this weird position of like retaining this like the only training that I have, which is in like reading texts and like asking myself like what like the sum total of this like genocide, like the narratives that we like construct around it, like like how do you do this impossible task of accumulating the massacres? Like just keeping track of the massacres is a full-time job. And this is what they rely on. They rely upon this mountain of crimes and you losing the fact that you can't distinguish between, oh, this hospital massacre and that hospital massacre, this school massacre and that hospital. And it's like, it adds to your head. And in the meantime, the point is to communicate to your enemy that, look, we can slaughter you en masse. We can ritualistically sacrifice you with all our power. You need to instruct your government or whatever to surrender and accept our power, right? And that's not working. So I don't know. I just feel like, I mean, a long time ago, I tweeted once. I was like, well, basically, I don't remember what it was, but to the effect of, well, it can't stay this way. And then someone was like, this is the way it's going to stay. It's just going to stay like this forever, for a while at least. I don't know if they said forever, but said something. And I was like, and I responded, I was like, I never really considered that. And that person was right. And saying that like this is a formula that the West has decided is going to be how it counters this like this historic thing of Al-Aqsa flood, that it's going to counter it with the most violent compact genocide. And was it you, Mikey, or Alex? I think it was Alex. You this have an incredibly compressed history of Western genocidal violence compressed into this 10-month span, like enacted upon this like tiny strip of land, like in West Asia called Gaza. And so I don't know. Yeah, it's like we just have to live with this for the rest of our lives, guys. We just have to accept that this period of our life, whenever it does come to an end, which whatever that means, is that like we won't like forgetting, like it will mark us how we view the world, how we read political events, how we talk about it, how in many of your cases teach it, how you write about it, how I podcast, like and if you haven't been, that's why that they kill so many Palestinian journalists, is that to simply bear witness to what has happened to Gaza, but also what Gaza has done in terms of the resistance. Like that's like a radicalizing moment. That's like That's a, Paul in the desert, like, transformation. And that's what they can never take away from October 7th. Like those
Yeah.
images of the paragliders, those dudes on paragliders. I mean, in a lot of ways, the genocide is just an attempt to cover up that memory and make them forget that, like, oh, your power is illusory.
Yeah.
All that tech you have, the billions of dollars you take, and you manufacture all these creative Inspector Gadget like devices to keep us at bay. Bro, two bros with a fucking paraglider. You have those in Santa Monica Beach, okay? The most low tech thing of all time. They just flew over like birds. It's like, I don't know. It's like we have Hollywood to imagine this stuff for us and sell it to us as culture, but Palestinians are doing it in person.
No, yeah, I mean the thing is, yeah, the I'm I've tried to turn myself into a military analyst over the past year because I felt like everyone else that was doing it was very inadequate for the job, other than John, who, whatever. I have John on when I can. But like militarily speaking, the wall is not what keeps got people in Gaza confined. It's the Israeli army that defends that wall. And when the army collapses, they won't be able to contain the people either. So they will be in the envelope. They will go back to their villages because the army is on a uh one-way road to collapse. There is, this is the thing, like when you analyze it objectively, there is no way the Israeli army is going to rebuild its capacity to what it was. I just don't see how that can happen. What are they going to recruit by recruiting the Orthodox, by uh you know hiring mercenaries with American money? Like what, how? There's no way they will be able to generate a military force that can contain Gaza again. I don't think. I think I don't see this war ending without Gaza being broken out of. I mean, I could be wrong, but the way that I see it, um the other thing is, like, I am a very inside the box thinker. So much of what the resistance has done from October to now, I are not things that I could have imagined. I didn't imagine the anti-tank weapons. I didn't imagine any of their ambushes. I didn't imagine um, them shooting at helicopters with the SAM-7s. I didn't imagine Iran doing what it did in April. So like there are more surprises to come for people like us who mainly just track what's already happened and write about it after the fact. And so those there are so many things that can happen now that the resistance can do that are not things that we have thought of, or maybe are things that we thought of as distant possibilities, like invading Galilee, or naval operations, or Yemen's Ansar Allah walking across Saudi Arabia or driving across Saudi Arabia to attack. There are just a lot of things that I don't consider because I talk about things that have already happened and not too much, except in fiction, about what things that might happen in the future.
That's an elementary aspect of all resistance movements, right? Like the
Yeah.
colonized, they know the colonizer really well. They have to. It's a matter of life and death. The opposite's not true.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Justin, there's a reason why they're doing all the horrific torture that they're doing at these prison sites. What, are they surprised by Palestinian resistance and constancy and their steadfastness in resisting since 48 and before 48? Like a lot of their reaction, I think, Mikey, you were speaking to this, a lot of their reactionary violence to Palestinian resistance, I think, stems from that. Like and this is something that unites all colonizers, all imperialists. They're always surprised by their subjects resisting and the way that they resist. They're always surprised by the fact that the people that they think are being kept down are not plotting against them the whole time. I mean, there's on the eve of the Haitian Revolution, there's a letter from one slave owner who's like, "Oh, these Negroes, there's no way they can even imagine or conceptualize liberty. Everything is calm." And then a month later, all of like the richest sugar producing area in the world was up in flames. because these slave revolutionaries burned the mechanisms and the tools of their oppression. Right? So
Yeah.
that's why this, I mean, it's really helpful, thanks to John, to Elmer, because I think that's like the point that he constantly makes as well. That it's a matter of life or death for the colonized to know their enemy and to know how to react to their enemy, and they're the ones who tend to be a step ahead. And so how do the Israelis react? They're always reacting, and the way that they react is through mass exterminating violence.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the Israelis were they had basically decided amongst themselves over the past few years that they had done enough assassinations of top, Hamas leadership, that they had successfully um, cut off Gaza from the rest of the world with its 17-year siege, that they had really put Palestinians on the diet, in order to make them dependent on Israel, and that there wasn't really a risk in Gaza anymore to, the Israeli military. And I, and obviously, like, the level of violence and bloodlust that we've seen over the last 10 months is like it's a way for the Israeli state to somehow um, cover up its embarrassment and its own inadequacy. And it's and yeah, I mean, just like the slaveholders in Haiti or in this country, who thought that everything was fine, and they were, like, God was on their side anyway, and empire was on their side, and they had done nothing wrong. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, history proves otherwise. But I mean, but yeah, it's I don't know. It's just it's so brutal. It's so brutal, and to have these, like, overviews are really important and really helpful. And at the same time, it's like seeing this churning of this violence hour by hour by hour. And I sent this tweet that really, I don't know, it really stuck out to me, but I sent it to the group. It's from someone on Twitter named Leila at Ain Al Adra. She says, perhaps my biggest mistake is that I have been preparing myself for the days after liberation and not the last stretch of the path to it. And I think that, like, kind of sums up how we were all talking about that naivete, that, like, a lot of the work that Palestinians have done for the last century, and that we have, lifted up as people in solidarity, has been to imagine liberation. And I mean, I remember, like, I don't know, maybe like 12, 13 years ago, I was when I was in Palestine, and I had kind of accompanied a trip to 48 from Dheisheh refugee camp in Bethlehem in the West Bank, for a bunch of kids, and they were going to visit their villages. And there was a time when, you could kind of do that for kids under, I think it was under 16 years old. Um, and I remember, like, we made a whole day trip out of it. We had, picnic, and it was just beautiful. And part of the day's activities was to actually, like, have the kids, and this came from themselves, that they wanted to kind of, like, map out where, when they go back and they return to their villages, like, what they wanted to rebuild. And, like, so they had, like, the landmarks of, like, the ruins of the mosque in the center of the village, and then, like, the old school that has been turned into, like, storage facility for the Israeli Land Authority or whatever, right? Like, they were gonna refurbish those and build, rebuild the village as their grandparents had known it. It was beautiful, and I love that. And at the same time, I remember speaking to friends who were like, yeah, it's going to happen, but there's going to be a lot of blood before that happens. And I think we weren't like, I don't know, that naivete, right? Of like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. I don't want anybody to die. Like, like these kids deserve to just go home.
Mhm.
But we know from from the last 500 years of Western colonialism that the colonizer doesn't just wake up one day and go, yeah, you're right. We're gonna give up and go back, to Europe.
Yeah.
That it doesn't work like that. And we wish it did. But
Yeah, and that's a function of like torture and rape, right? Like
yeah,
it's not just, it's to get the very idea of liberation and freedom out of these people's minds. Like October 7th showed that possibility. So how do you get them, how do you erase that possibility from their minds? Well, that's the purpose of torture, right? You fragment somebody internally and psychologically. And we know like torture there's a straight line you can draw from like the Inquisition, right? Like the religious foundation of torture methods to the type that we see today. And that initial religious form of torture was based on extirpation. And then when you had these Latin American dictators who take over, they would talk about, we're going to extirpate the Marxist cancer inside of people by torturing to death or disappearing them. Then then we see this guy with the mask on Israeli TV, the rapist, talking about how he has the right to do that, right? Why? I mean, because it's about like, we're going to do these to these people because we have to extirpate the very idea of liberation and freedom from their minds. So how are we going to do that? We are going to physically, mentally, and psychologically break them with the most horrific forms of torture that we can think of. And not only that, but then we're going to debate it on national TV. And the guy wearing the mask, like on there. And then, yeah, later I saw a video where he took off the mask and he's like just a horrifying looking human being, first of all. But second
really
of all,
ugly
like,
guy. Yeah.
just like, it's,
We
and
had
then
already
the
seen him though,
protests.
right? He was there
Yeah,
on
I
the
think
first
so.
day of the confrontation with the
I
military
think so.
police. That was the
Yes.
same guy talking to the camera. I think. I don't know. I didn't look that closely for the
But how
reasons
do
you
you
just.
put that back in the box? Like, how do you, again, liberation possible and freedom is possible. How do you then try to erase that possibility? And I think that's perhaps one way to understand this genocide. That's what they're like Mikey said, the moment that they have a mass rapist on national TV trying to justify it, they're done, man. They're defeated. This is one defeat in a long string of defeats. But as you said, Nora, like it's just that tweet is like very Ilan Pape, right? Like he talks about that as well, right? The last part is going to be awful. Like, are we ready for it?
They wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have had that debate if they didn't have to. They would rather have done it in the dark. They would rather have done it with the masks on. They would rather have not done it on camera. And yeah, having to try to make the case in public is not where they wanted to be.
In the Knesset, right? They also had that debate in the Knesset.
Yeah.
It's just,
And so they've turned over their states to these elements, and these elements are not capable of winning a war, I don't think.
Yeah. But they are capable, and I think they find it rational and necessary within the corner that they've fought themselves into
Mhm.
to become more brutal in
Yeah,
every aspect of their
absolutely.
genocidal project in order to try to
Yeah,
to turn the volume up enough where it's like there's so much violence going on, so many massacres that you can't keep track anymore, right? Where it's actually harder to keep track of multiple massacres than a singular flower massacre, right?
yeah,
Because you could actually report on that, investigate that, protest that single concrete event. But
yeah,
like once you've blown up multiple hospitals, once you've blown up like multiple humanitarian aid distributions and multiple schools and mosques, like how do you hold all of that, right? You can't. And but I also think that they're responding to something that you also can't contain or
yeah,
drown out. And I think like all of this I think is responding to similar kind of like what Sina coined as like, revolutions in media, right? Like
mm,
I still see every once in a while the videos from that were released by Israel and their propaganda arm but were recorded by the resistance and now spread by the resistance. On October 7th, people who had lived their entire lives under siege and seeing, like the sunrise
Mhm.
on the free side of an occupied Palestine, and just I just hear that the voice of the guy recording on the back of one of those
Mhm.
motorcycles being like, drive slower, bro, drive slower, and just getting to enjoy that moment before martyrdom.
Yep.
Just you can't unsee that, you can't unhear that, you can't unring that bell. And I think now that like all of Palestine, all the world has seen like that possibility, that other side of occupation, I think the US and all of its vassal states are doing everything they can to try to be like, this is the cost. And are you willing to pay it? And just trying to make that cost as high as humanly possible. And
Yep.
and I think what they're going to realize is that people are willing to pay that price.
Yeah. That might be a good note to end on, actually. So, yeah,
Thanks,
I'm
guys.
sure
I
we'll
needed
have.
this.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Everybody who's watching, hang in there, and we'll be back. I mean, there's gonna be news.
Yeah.
There's gonna be stuff happening, so we'll be back. You'll see us in a week or two. Until then, see you guys.